Hey now, this is Rob here from Rob's School of Music on an early episode on a Wednesday. Beautiful weather here in New York, and we're getting to hang out with a quadruple threat, the fifth quadruple version of that, Mr. Rosh Roslin. Hello, sir, and welcome.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Dude, the pleasure is mine. I mean, you got one hell of a resume, and just kind of, I'm so excited to pick your brain and just hear your story. So for those tuning in or hearing this whenever they hear it, we are a music school based about 40 minutes outside of New York City. And due to COVID, we have been fully virtual for the past 12 months. We tried to flatten the curve for 2 weeks, and it has been 12 months. And it's been a roller coaster, but we're coming up on about 5,000 lessons we've done virtually in the past year. So it's been a beautiful thing.
That's amazing.
And, thanks, brother. Yeah. And I'm just really excited to get to talk to another incredible musician, on the other side of the country, probably dealing with things, because I know New York and LA, we got hit real hard, real fast in the beginning. So what's your story, man? How'd you get into music? Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, sure. For sure. So I grew up, I'm from Hawaii, and then I grew up in San Diego. So the area where I'm from in San Diego is where Blink-182 is from. So there's a ton of pop punk bands. I initially started out as a trumpet player. Playing in school marching band, school concert band, jazz band, pep band. And then when I was like about 16, got into punk rock. My friends were in a band, and I remember it was like a party, like a house party. And my friend was like the guitar player. And, so there's like 100 people like crammed into this living room. And I witnessed a punk rock show. Like people were crowd surfing, going crazy. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. I want to be part of that. And so after the show, everybody's hanging out, and he showed me 2 chords, and I was hooked. And I haven't put the guitar down since. And so about, I think, maybe like a year or 2 into college, I decided to move to LA. And, so far I've made a living, told my mom, hey, Mom, I'll get like a real job or whatever if this music thing doesn't work out, but I got to go do this and try it. And they've been very supportive. They said, hey, go do the thing. You always have a place to come back to if you ever need to. And, so far I haven't had to like keep that promise of getting a real job. Been a full-time musician ever since.
That's awesome, man. I love stories like that, because I think there's so many people, I see it with students all the time. I tell the story. Often there was a girl, I started teaching her when she was in 11th grade, and the mom introduces herself and says, don't get too comfortable with my daughter, because once college comes, she's done. Music is just a hobby. And then she went on to brag about her son, who was on a baseball scholarship going into college. Well, fast forward 4 years later, that son hasn't played baseball in about 3 years, and that girl will be graduating this spring with a music degree.
So yeah. There you go. And it's kind of the same. I kind of have a similar story to that, because I actually studied psychology and philosophy in college first.
Wow.
And I ended up eventually like getting a degree in it, but it's adjacent. So the thing was, when I was about 19, I was actually flying from New York. You're from New York. I was flying from New York, and then I actually ended up getting what's called splenic infarction. So basically my spleen blew up on this plane. Wow. And so they landed in Arizona, and I had to I blacked out, and then I woke up in like the ER and everything like that. And so it was one of those like near death incidences or whatever, and that in my mind basically said, okay, life's short, things could happen at any time. This was like a total fluke, just happened just out of nowhere. So you might as well like pursue the things you're absolutely passionate about, because you never know if you're going to live 5 minutes, 5 years, 50 years, 50, like all those things happen. So I took that upon myself to go, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go for this music thing. And there's always going to be like quote unquote backup plan. You don't need a backup plan, but more it's just like, you might as well spend your life doing the things that you're really, really passionate about, because, you're going to get rewarded either way, regardless of if you actually make a career out of it. Playing music, even if I was, like, I don't know, an accountant or something, I would still be playing music on the weekends and like a cover band, or I would still be playing guitar just for the pure enjoyment of it. So it really feeds your soul in that way. And I think that like, even studying music on a college level, like, you can totally do that. You don't need to have like a quote unquote degree to be a musician. You know, it's just one of the things, like, you either can do it or you can't. And there's so many levels of like how you can do this thing. You don't need to even be full-time professional. You and I were talking about that offline, where it's like, there's no shame, or there's no, there shouldn't be a stigma against musicians who maybe do something else as like a day job, or they do something else part-time or whatever. Because like, even for myself, like, I'll do stuff that's like music adjacent. You know, I'll do like web development or video editing, content creation for clients and everything like that. And even though it's like within the scope of doing music, it's not like I'm playing guitar on stage or playing guitar for artists like 100% of the time. And those things are just as enjoyable to me as, you know, playing, you know, a gig or doing a session or anything. So yeah, I would say to people who, you know, have this kind of notion, maybe like, oh, I don't know if I should pursue this in college or whatever, just do the thing that makes you happy. You know, life's super short. And, you know, I'm living proof that you can take a chance, and it's okay if you fail. I failed 100,000 million times, but you might as well, like, you owe it to yourself to like never like question like, oh, what if I didn't do this thing? What if I didn't, you know, pursue it? Because those are the things that you're going to like be on your deathbed, like wondering, you know, regretting, going like, oh my God, I could have done that thing. I should have done that thing. I should have at least given it a shot.
I completely agree. And I think that's something that we really try, you know, when I'm speaking to whomever I'm getting to talk with throughout this whole interview process. My first interview happened the first week of April last year. So, you know, we're coming up on 52 plus amazing conversations I've gotten to have with musicians. And I think one of the things the pandemic showed us was like for me personally, like outside of the school, I had an acoustic duo with my girlfriend, Samantha. She's a singer. She's a voice teacher here at the school. And we did like 1,000+ gigs in a 5-year period. And 2020 was booked up to be great. And then 2020 happened. Yeah. And having, you know, Rob's School of Music, which was, you know, sort of a way, just like you said, to do something adjacent to performing, teaching, it gave me the opportunity to keep doing something musical. And as long as there's something creative inside of it, I think there's something to be excited about while we're doing it. So I think it's awesome. I think that, be it video editing, web development, all that stuff, I think it all connects in a really cool way. You just gotta remove that silly stigma of, well, you don't play guitar 24 hours a day. Well, no, that's pretty unrealistic.
Yeah. And, you know, like, to have a career in music, I mean, you're going to be doing a million things anyway, right? So I talk about this concept that, you know, I wish I could claim, but it's decentralizing your income, right? And if you, let's say, have a 9-to-5 day job, that means 100% of your income is tied to this one job. If that job disappears, like the pandemic, totally, it happened to a lot of people who had a quote unquote secure job. I mean, they lost their job overnight. And so their income goes from zero, or I mean, so it goes from 100 to zero in like a blink of an eye. And so, you know, I find that musicians, we're so resilient because we're used to doing a lot of things. Like, you have that duo, so you're playing gigs, there's a little stream of income there. You're teaching, so there's a little bit of stream of income there. If you're doing sessions, there's a stream of income there. Mm-hmm. To me, I view it like a river of nickels. I have all these little things that I do that are all related to music, that when the pandemic happened, I had like a calendar just like you booked up. I was like, oh, cool. Like South by Southwest is coming up, you know, maybe there's going to be some touring for Coachella into the summer, all these gigs, you know, wedding season. I'll be playing a bunch of weddings. Yep. And then all that just kept going. Like, it was like a domino effect. And I was like, and like every musician in LA, I was panicking too. I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then I realized, I was like, okay, but I have all these other income streams that are completely independent of me actually being there in person. I was already doing remote sessions. I was already doing remote work, like remote video editing, remote production, you know, mixing for clients, you know, songwriting, doing sessions, like for clients that don't live in LA, like non-person, you know, just track in Logic, Dropbox the stems to the client. They, you know, they Venmo you or PayPal you. So I had this little infrastructure of income that actually didn't get affected at all. And it was only like the stuff that I needed to be in person for, like gigging. And I've been, again, really grateful, really lucky that during the pandemic, all that stuff actually like increased to kind of offset all the gigs that disappeared because of the pandemic. So, you know, decentralizing your income is actually a good strategy, because if you have all these income streams from different sources, if one disappears or a couple disappear, that's okay. That means you have all these other ones that can offset that. You know, it's the same thing of like, you know, in LA is a big touring town, right? A lot of musicians, like, you know, they tour with artists and stuff. And that can be a little bit, you know, dicey or dangerous, because if you're on tour with an artist, you have to say no to everything else. You can't be there in person. And so if the tour, you know, when the tour ends, or if the, you know, the artist decides, hey, I'm going to go into the studio for 2 years and like make my next record, and then your touring gig disappears, you don't have any income coming in. So I think, like, you know, for people who are considering trying to be a professional musician, it's always just important to like realize that, one, have a bunch of sources of income. Does it music related or non-music related, doesn't really matter. There's so many musicians in LA that, and we're talking people who play with the top stuff, that all have different income streams that aren't related to music. So like Jason Sutter, he plays for Cher. He plays for, I can't remember who else he plays for. He is also has a real estate license. So he buys and flips houses. A friend of mine, his name is Sean Hurwitz. He plays for Enrique Iglesias. Same thing. He buys and flips houses. He has like rental property out in the Midwest, you know, and he loves it. The thing is, you got to be passionate about it. You can't just think, oh, I'll just get into X, Y, and Z, and that'll like offset my income or decentralize my income. You have to also like be passionate about it. So, but those guys, when you talk to them about real estate, their eyes light up, just like if you talk to them about like guitars or guitar pedals. They go, oh yeah, man, I got this, you know, I'm thinking about investing in Florida, you know, maybe, or like over in here, you know, maybe I'm thinking commercial right now. I have residential. And like Sean will just talk my ear off about that. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing that you're so passionate about that. So I really love the idea of musicians also being able to do other things. There should be less of a stigma. And, you know, the pandemic nowadays, I think it's okay now. It's like becoming a little bit more acceptable because people are just doing things to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's finding the opportunity in the adversity, because it has been a rough time for a lot of people who this was their full-time gig. So I think it gives us, and I, you know, one of the questions I always ask somewhere over the course of this, you know, I'm talking to like Anita Strauss or Richard Fortus, like big names that are in the group with the artist they're with. And it's like, well, what's something else about you? Because everyone thinks that you live and breathe music, and I'm sure you do, but like real estate, that's an awesome thing, you know? And if I'm passionate about passion, it sounds cheesy. So like, if you're like, dude, I am in love with black zip up hoodies, let me tell you, you get this particular thread count and this kind of zipper. And it's like, that's intoxicating. You just get sucked right into it. So I think it's really exciting to open up ourselves to other things.
Yeah. I mean, you had Matt Halpern on you know, in an interview. And I mean, I'm a drummer too, right? There's like my drum kit back there. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's like one of my heroes on drumming. And if you talk to him, he's got so many things he's passionate about that they're not just drums. He's not like, I'm just the drummer for Periphery. Right. He has like an apparel line, you know, with like the deep V-neck, and he'll talk for days about that. And I love how passionate he is about that, where it's infectious, because he's like, yeah, you know, like you said, the thread count of all those things. Like for example, like I love software. I love coding. I love, you know, solving algorithms and stuff like that. And my brain just kind of works that way. They're like little puzzles. And I was always like reading books and doing puzzles and stuff. Like I can't remember what the store is at the mall, but they would have all those little puzzles. Like you would just like try to solve them, all these little sample puzzles. And I would just go there and just do that. And you couldn't tear me away from that. So I would take apart my toys and stuff and try to put them back together. So so I love, you know, coding and stuff like that. And it comes from my parents, you know, their software, you know, they work in software and everything like that. So it kind of rubbed off on me where, you know, like you don't want to do things that your parents do when you're growing up. And especially I was like a punk rock guy with like a mohawk and stuff. And I was like, yeah, you know, rebel and all this. So I was like, I can't do what my parents do. That's like lame. That's uncool. But now like I've come full circle where I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. So for me, like coding, it, you know, understanding how a computer works and all those things are something I'm super passionate about. It's also something that I feel is going to be super relevant in the future for any creative, anybody who is a creative, musician, artist, anything. You should know how to use a computer. You don't have to like code, but like if you're a musician, like knowing the Adobe suite, like knowing how to use Photoshop, knowing how to use Premiere, to edit video, knowing how to use Logic to record. These kinds of things are going to be useful skills that, you know, I've gotten paid for. And not only that, but I've gotten paid to teach other people how to do it. So it's going to be those things where somebody is going to be assumed at some point, you know, if it isn't already, where like, if you're a musician, it's like, hey, you know, I love the way you play. Can you play on this track or record? And they're just going to assume that you can record yourself.
Right.
And then like, you know, this video, you know, you can strip the audio, make a podcast out of it. All these digital assets are going to serve you in the future. You can put them on Instagram, you can make a podcast, put it on YouTube, put it on Facebook, and all these, you know, digital assets are going to just kind of keep serving you in the future. Like you're wearing an Axe 3 shirt. So like at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, I made a bunch of Axe tutorial videos, just put them up on YouTube. Just said, here's some basics, how to program an Axe. Like, here's like, you literally just got it out of the box and you don't know what to do. Here's some real basic stuff. Because I've run into situations and have clients that, you know, when they come to me, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to build you like presets that are going to sound like Pink Floyd's The Wall and all this craziness. And they're like, I don't even know how to turn the tuner on the Axe. I was like, oh, okay, let's start with the basics. Sorry, I get so excited, like going, you know, to like that level. So I was like, okay, how to use like the tuner, how to build a basic preset, how to run in stereo versus mono, all these things. And so, you know, understanding like the technical aspect of what we're going to be all experiencing in the future is going to be an asset that is going to serve you, every musician well, any creative. Because if you can create content, that content lives on the internet forever. It's always working for you. So these YouTube videos I made at the beginning of the pandemic, people still contact me about them. Hey, I stumbled across this YouTube video. You know, they send me an email. Would you be, can you walk me through how to build a sound like this guitar player? And then, you know, I go, yeah, sure. Let's jump on Zoom. And then I walk them through how to like send audio to me through Zoom. And then we talk about what sounds they're looking for and kind of how to build presets and, you know, solving problems. So that's a source of income like anything else. You know, it's music related. I'm kind of playing guitar, but I'm helping somebody else out there who may have a problem. And I've have clients that are like in India. I have clients that are in the UK. I have clients in New York. You know, they're all over the world. And so people are, you know, we're all like, especially with the pandemic, we've all had to like transition online. So a lot of people, there's so many opportunities out there for musicians that you don't need to just be playing gigs. You don't need to just be teaching lessons or doing sessions. All these different income streams can come in and help you, you know, have a career and survive, you know, during this pandemic.
Totally, man. I think the stuff you said about just being on top of technology, I think it was, you know, even within the ecosystem with the music school here, like we had the second COVID death in the state of New York occur right in Suffern, New York, where we are, before New York City got crazy. And I was alerted of that a little bit before it became super public knowledge. So it was like a Saturday, we did our lessons, we were washing our hands, but we knew something was coming. And I got the phone call and I said, we're going online. And I had to learn how to use Zoom, teach all my teachers how to use Zoom, teach all the students how to use Zoom, get everyone ready to go for Monday's lessons. So it was like in, you know, a day and a half, like just boom, do it. And it was eye-opening how many other musicians that I employ had no clue how to do any of this stuff. And then all the students that range from, you know, 5 years old all the way up to in their 70s, people just don't know these things. And I agree, like it's almost like this knowledge is almost like going to become like currency. And the more you know, the more you can do with it, the more valuable you become. And I think, you know, again, with the Axe FX stuff, I got mine over here, and I'm still using all the stock presets because I can't figure it out. So I'm going to hire you to help me with that.
Yeah, man. I mean, they're great, you know, but you're absolutely right. You know, I talked about this in like a different podcast, but using a computer or just using technology is so important, because if you look in human history, there's all these like, you know, fluctuation and influx points of where most of the population couldn't do something. And then somebody, you know, a small segment of the population could. So back in the day, you know, most of the human population was illiterate. So those who could read had controlled everything. They had all the power because they're like, hey, it's written here. I know how much you owe. I know how much I owe. I know how much like XYZ, you know, bales of grain or whatever. They could just keep track of all these things, just writing it down and reading it. You know, they're reading from like religious texts or whatever. And they're saying, well, this is what the text says. Since you don't know how to read, they can make it up or whatever. And then you get to like the Industrial Revolution, right? And like, so people who could engineer and make machines and make factories, those people had a significant advantage over everybody else because they're building things at an accelerated rate. If you understood how to engineer things, how to build factories, now we have these like mechanized hierarchies of building a factory to build, cars or whatever. And so people who knew all those things had an advantage over people who didn't know engineering. So now we're at this influx point where there's a large segment of the population like can use a computer. And I say that really lightly, where it's like they can check their email, go on the internet and all that. But then there's like this small segment who like really understands like how to use certain types of software, whether it's like the Adobe stuff or doing code or doing all those things. And you'll see that they have a significant advantage over everybody else because they can make a program, make a website, do all these things that scale infinitely. It doesn't cost you any more to record like a guitar lesson and then sell it for like $1 on the internet. It just generates itself. So you have this incredible leverage with a computer or with technology that hasn't really been seen before in human history. And there's going to be this like gap as things go along where the people who can't do that or they only understand really simple stuff, and then the people who don't, there's going to be this widening gap. So like, for example, like in COVID, like here in California, the first tier that opened up was people who are over 65. And so they were having trouble booking appointments. Like I had friends who were like, oh my God, I couldn't get my parents an appointment booked on this website because they couldn't do it themselves. So they had to do it and they were struggling doing it. So, I mean, that is kind of a tragedy if you think about it, because then that's the barrier of entry. If you can't use the internet and you can't like get through this barrier of entry, then you can't get vaccinated and be safe and actually like be healthy.
Dying because of that.
Yeah. And, that's one of many examples. There's better examples that are like, a little bit more positive where it's like, hey, if you can build something that scales, like you don't have that income just like generates while you sleep. So one of the things that I, read in a book about this was like, if you want to like make things, if you want to like earn income while you sleep, build things that don't sleep. It's kind of obvious, but the internet doesn't sleep. Your computer doesn't sleep. Content that you create doesn't sleep. Like, all the interviews that you have, they're up there. So people can just like listen to them and then they'll contact you. They're like, oh, wow. I really love the interview you did with Matt Halpern, how can maybe you have subscribers that, stumble upon a podcast and then they go, oh, Rob's really cool. I want to sign up lessons for school since it's virtual now. And people are like, it's interesting that like, it seems so obvious, but a lot of creatives aren't taking advantage of all these tools that are out there now. And I try to be on the forefront of that. I'm lucky that my parents work in software, so I get to kind of hear what like the bleeding edge technology is. But any creative can do this. You don't need to like have a computer science degree or any of this. You just need to like kind of get your feet wet, focus on the things that you can do. And even the learning process online is so cheap or free, or just hire somebody. If you don't want to do it, just hire somebody who can, and there's plenty of people out there who love doing this stuff. They eat it for breakfast, and then they can create content for you that scales, brings business to what you do as a musician and a creative.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important for people, it's similar. It cycles back to teaching, honestly, because if someone's going to hire, a guitar teacher, well, yeah, you could just go on YouTube and watch free videos, but maybe there's certain things that aren't clicking. So to have someone on the other side of the screen to say, oh no, well, your thumb is in front of the neck. What is it doing there? You got to have your thumb behind the neck at all times, these little things that you might not know. So I think it's important for perhaps the consumer to be aware that it's okay to pay for something because you're paying for that expertise, and it's sometimes it'll make from point A to point B happen much quicker if you can just expedite it by having the proper parameters around you.
Yeah, and I like, I'm an educator and I give guitar and drum lessons and stuff, and a lot of times people go, well, like why should you pay for lessons, or why should you sign up for like a music school, like a virtual one, or even doing it in real person? It's like, because they go, oh, the content's already all out there. But that's the thing, you're not selling the content. Right. You as a music school, you're selling the organization, because all that content, you can search guitar lessons on YouTube, and then you're going to find one guy who's teaching you like the harmonic minor scale and another guy who's teaching you like a basic G chord. And you're not going to know which one you should start on if you're a beginner student or even an intermediate student. So instead, what you're selling as an educator is organization. You're selling a way to know that A to Z and all the points in between is going to be presented in an organized manner. It's going to be catered to the student's needs and goals. Because, I mean, if you're not interested in shredding and playing harmonic minor, it's not really worth your time to like practice that. If you're trying to like learn folky songs, it's like a G chord, a C chord, a D chord. And so you're selling the organization, you're selling the community, because your school is going to be a community of students, whether they're in New York or virtual or whatever. So you can gauge where you're at with the progress of the people that are part of your program. You're also like selling like the fact that all your teachers are unique. They have a unique approach and a unique style that is going to, you know, maybe align with the student better. Like, so, you know, sometimes, and I've had this experience with teachers too, where like I've studied with teachers where I was like, okay, well, you know, a lot of our goals are not aligned. My goals as a student and your goals as a teacher don't really click. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad student or you're a bad teacher. It's just that we're not looking at the horizon the same way. Where I want to end up through your education isn't my goal. It's not bad or good. It's just different. So a lot of times when people are thinking about education in that way, a lot of music teachers are like, well, I teach guitar. And I'm like, try not to think that way. Instead, think like I sell and teach organization. I sell and teach a process, a method. Or my goal as an educator was I spent most of my early music upbringing completely confused. And it was frustrating for me because I was like, remember being 6th grade and they're trying to explain time signatures. And I was like, okay, I understand 4/4. Okay, counting to 4. Then suddenly I would get a piece of sheet music that was in 6/8. And I was like, what does 6/8 mean? And they go, oh, the top number is the subdivision or is the amount of notes in a measure, and the bottom number is the subdivision that gets the count. And I was like, okay, I'm in 6th grade. I barely can, you know, like understand math, like, you know, algebra, like basic algebra. So that means absolutely nothing to me. And so I felt like through a lot of my, you know, the early band stuff, I felt kind of stupid. And it was really discouraging for me, where I was like, okay, I still don't understand why we're counting this. And then it wasn't until a teacher explained to me, he said, oh, that time signature thing, the top number is how high you count, and the bottom number is how fast. And I was like, it clicked right away. Yeah. Where I was like, oh, 4/4 is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when the bottom number doubles in count, then you just count twice as fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it just instantly clicked for me. Now, it may not click for everybody in that way, but my goal as an educator was to give that experience to other students, where I was like, okay, I'm going to take all these really esoteric, crazy terms and concepts and try to simplify it in the easiest way. Like, no matter what, I'm like, can I explain this to Rosh, confused 1-year, you know, music student who didn't understand any of this and just spent most of the time confused? Like, you know, I was a trumpet player, so they're like, oh, your instrument transposes. It's a B flat instrument. And I was like, you know, what does that mean? And I was like, so, you know, I'm trying to tune the trumpet with a tuner, and I'm playing like a C and then showing up as like a B flat or whatever. And I was so confused. Like, I'm playing a C, but the note's different on the tuner. And they were trying to explain it to me. So everything I do in education is, and again, that's my goal, is like, here, I'm like the guy you see when you spend, you know, the first couple years of whatever instrument you are confused. And I'm just like, I'm here to just clear all that up and then just like move you along to like the concepts that you want. Because a lot of my students, I'm actually spending more time undoing a lot of the damage and confusion from maybe them going on YouTube and just going like, oh, I saw on YouTube how to play a minor pentatonic scale, and they have like this insane fingering or something, or they're like, I don't understand the cage system. How do I organize the fretboard? All these kinds of things. Or like or drummers, like, you know, like, oh, I don't understand the concept of the difference between groupings and subdivisions. Like, so my goal is always like, okay, I'm going to just like make this really easy to understand in as simple a way as possible. And then once you understand that concept, it'll like open up where you want to go with this. And then, because I just didn't want anybody to experience that. I that's why I've like, people ask me like, oh, you know, why did you start learning drums? And I was like, man, I almost quit guitar because I was just so frustrated. And it was one of those things where I was like, it wasn't because I was like burnt out. Everybody's like, oh, you were like burnt out. I was like, no. I was like frustrated because there were certain things that I couldn't get or understand and couldn't get into my playing. And I couldn't figure out a way around it. Because I'm not the type of person to like keep hitting a brick wall and banging my head against the wall. Like, it's more like I want to like stand back and look at the brick wall and like try to figure out like the easiest, most efficient way around it, rather than just like trying to like, you know, pound all the way through it. So that's why it's like when I talk to a lot of musicians of like, I'm like, hey, how are, you know, they're like, hey, I want to get more students. What are your strategies of doing this? I was like, well, what's your goal as a teacher?
Right.
And a lot of them go, and I'm like, well, you got to have at least a direction, right? There's got to be something. It's not like you have a method, but more just like, what do you want to do? Like, why is education important to you? Because if it's just something like, well, I'm a musician and I don't have enough gigs, so, you know, maybe I could always teach. And I'm like, well, then you're going to run into a student like me who's going to study with you, and they're going to be confused, and you're not going to be able to explain why or how to them. And then they're going to go on and just hate music. And I never wanted that whole feeling. I just somehow like, that's why I've changed a lot of instruments, because I was like, well, I'm just frustrated with this instrument. I love music. I'll just move on to something else because I can't find somebody to kind of break down this concept for me. So, but yeah, I that's why it's like, if you think you're just selling organization, you're selling a system, you're selling community, those things are going to be way more valuable than just the information, because all the information's out there. It's already on YouTube and everything else.
Dude, I couldn't agree more. And actually, you know, it's in a different world and a closer time, you'd be a perfect guy under our ecosystem here, because that's what it is. Like, I think, you know, not to go too far down a tangent, but this is another, you know, big passion of mine is there are so many, again, I'll single out guitar players because we can be the worst sometimes, that can shred, like sweep pick and melt your face right off, but they couldn't teach someone how to, you know, play a 3-chord song, because it's a very different skill set. And I think that's important when you're being an educator and you're trying to, you know, take this knowledge and put it to someone else. You have to hit it from every angle you can till it makes sense. Because what, you know, a big thing here is we say, you know, we're going to teach you the way you want to learn, because if what makes sense to me might not make sense to you. The way you just explained, you know, breaking down 6/8, that's a brilliant way to make sense of that. I've not heard it explained that way before. So boom, right now, just casually, you made something make sense in a way that sometimes difficult to articulate. So
yeah,
cool.
Exactly. And, you know, it's so many like meta levels of things, right? Because, you know, it's not even just musicians. Everybody on the planet takes their own thing for granted. Like what you do. Like, can you imagine, like, I always try to imagine this, like if I could explain to somebody who didn't know how to walk. Like, we take that for granted. We just like go, okay, well, I'll just stand up and move my legs. And, you know, and you have to think about it and go like, okay, well, do I step with my left foot first, my right foot first? And so there's so many things that musicians take for granted that other people would just like die to learn. And people do it so naturally, you know, like Steve Jordan's like one of my favorite drummers, you know, and, you know, you ask him like, oh, you know, like, how do you make your groove feel so good? And he's great and he's brilliant where he can articulate, oh, well, I do this X, Y, and Z. These are the guys I listen to. These are the things I worked on. These are the things that I'll actually do. And I've heard so many interviews of him like, oh yeah, you know, sometimes if I really want the groove to kind of start feeling more aggressive, I'll just speed up, which is unheard of. Like, you would think a drummer is like going to have like metronomic time from beginning to end. And he's like, no way, man. Like, if you listen to Charlie Watts and Ringo, you know, they just speed up at the end and it gives that energy, that bounce at that last chorus. And I was like, oh, that's why Steve Jordan is Steve Jordan. You know, he'll just be so bold and daring to do that. So, and here's the thing. It's like, there's some, let's just take another drummer. Maybe he does the same thing, but he doesn't know how to articulate that. So he doesn't make a really great educator because he can't articulate what he takes for granted. So I always try to remember, like, okay, what I'm doing on the instrument may feel really natural for me, but a student who's been playing 1 year or even 10 years, they might go, I don't understand that. And so like even doing things like I'll do this before I start teaching. I'll take the guitar and play it left-handed. Like just flip the guitar and go, okay, let's play Wonderwall or some easy song like Twist and Shout, you know? And I'll sit there and try to play it left-handed and I'm go, oh my God, this is the hardest thing on the planet. And then it really reinforces the idea that like whatever my student is dealing with, this is exactly the feeling where it's like my hands don't cooperate, do not move in this fashion. I'll sit down at the drum kit and then try to play like open-handed or play the kick drum with the left foot, you know, instead of the right foot, and just try to play like that. And I'm like, okay, they're dealing with this. This is really difficult. That's even like advanced players, maybe a concept's really difficult. So I'll even like crack open like a book that makes like no sense to me, like a Richard Feynman like physics book or something, or you know, David Deutsch, like, you know, the what is it, Beginning of Infinity, and I'll just like flip to some random page in it and start reading it and go, I don't get this. And then just to remember that, like, if I'm explaining something to somebody, I'll be like, yeah, you know, like the chord tones of like a 2-5-1, you know, are, you know, you can play the root, the flat third, the fifth, and then the flat seven, and then you can, you know, do an appoggiatura to resolve to the third of the 5 chord. They go, what? I have to remember that not everybody's like uptaking the information in that same way. So I have to like, you know, force myself to experience that same thing. So it reminds me like, this is what a student is dealing with, like the left-handed guitar thing all the time, so that you have patience. Because, you know, I'm sure you've had the same experience. I've had experience with, I've had some incredibly great teachers, and I've had some teachers that they're so natural at what they do, but that they can't explain it. They just go, oh, you know. I've had a drum teacher who shall remain nameless. He's a great guy, great player. And I was like, hey man, I really love your groove. I really love your feel. How did you practice that? And then he's like, oh, you know, like this? And he plays like the, you know, the deepest, heaviest groove ever. And I go, yeah, that. He's like, oh man, it's like a feel thing. You know, you just got to feel it. And I go, like, feel it like in time, or like feel like the snare laid back, or like, and he's like, you know, you just kind of feel it. You just, and I go like, I need a little bit more. Please help me. Because I'm sitting there and I'm looking at a click in Logic, and my time is not lining up with that. I listen back. It's like pushing and pulling, not in a great way. I just want to get your element and your approach to groove into that. And then he couldn't explain what he was doing, but he was doing it incredible. So, but then there's guys who like go, you know, like even interviews or teachers or whatever that can totally explain. Like I've studied with Dave Ehrlich, who plays for like M83, Miley Cyrus, 1975, like a ton of people. He's like one of these like technical masters, you know, in LA, and he can articulate everything he does. It's so amazing. Where, you know, I've asked him like, okay, when you're playing with a click, what are you thinking of? And he's like, well, practice this. And he's like, play everything in time, and then like, you know, play the snare slightly behind the click, slightly ahead. How does that feel? How does that sound? And then compare and contrast. And then he also is all about like body mechanics with his technique. He's like, okay, well, if you're holding the sticks like this, that's not what your hand naturally does. Like if you throw a ball. So take the same look at the motions of your hands of throwing a ball. That's how you would want to hit a snare drum. Wow. And he fixed a lot of like technical challenges that I was having, because I was hitting these brick walls of technique. And he's like, okay, well, we're going to fix this. I mean, he does some really incredible work. Like even he's like, yeah, your right leg's not relaxed. You know, you're digging the beater in. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. And he comes over up and he like picks up my leg. He just like, he's holding my leg and he's like, I want you to relax this. And I was like, he's like, no, you got to relax it. And then I was like, oh, like just letting my weight drop on the leg. He's like, yeah, you got like 40 pounds of weight on your leg. All you need to do is just pick up your leg and then just drop your leg down to like hit that kick drum. You know, those kinds of things. Like those kinds of educators, I mean, they're worth their weight in platinum, not even gold. Like, and the ones that can explain exactly what's going on and what they can do. I mean, there's so many out there, and they don't have to be famous, you know, like there's always that weird misconception of like those who can't do teach. It's more like there's a really great heuristic. If you meet a musician who does a million different things and teaching is one of them, that means they're a practitioner. They know what works, you know, like you were playing gigs, so you know what works on a gig, you know, like these are the skills that you need to develop to be able to play live. And then you can teach that to a student, like versus somebody who's, if you haven't done a gig in 20 years, how do you really know? like versus somebody who's like, okay, these are the practical skills that you need. Like, as drummers, is like, do you need to play like a quadruple, quintuplet, paradiddle 5/4 fill, or do you need to play with good time, good feel, zugga dugga 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 crash? Like those things sound really good. And trying to play Stump the Band and doing some weird metric modulation while you're playing like Mustang Sally probably isn't going to be the thing that's going to get you called back, But yeah, that's why I love like talking about education, and that's why I love like what you're doing with your program and everything. I think it's so amazing.
Thanks, dude. I mean, it's I feel like I am talking in a mirror right now with because it's like that the angle, coming from a musician who gigged extensively in the duo, and before that I toured, doing hard rock and metal music. So it's all different angles. And then wedding band life, where you need to go from 6 different genres over the course of a half an hour. It's a real world music education. And I think that's really what's special.
Yeah, absolutely. And those kind of skill sets, you can't teach. Like, you got to kind of like, because you can explain it's like, what's that quote by like the Marines used to say? It's like every plans never survive contact with the enemy, right? Okay. So like something like that, because like I come from a military family, so like but so if that totally makes sense. You can have a plan, you can just plan everything out, like this is exactly how it's going to go. But what happens when you stand on stage and then you forgot to tuck your cable through your guitar strap, and then you step on it in the first song and it just pops out?
Yep.
That you do that once, and it's happened to me. You will never do that again. Yeah. So every time I like get on stage, I'm like, oh, right, through the strap, boom. Like all those things. Like, what do you do when, the singer comes in too soon or too late, or comes in at the wrong chord? Those kinds of things. What do you do when the drummer doesn't really know the song? So you have to kind of like feel your way through it and cue the drummer. These are skills that like you can always give somebody a heads up. Like you can teach them, like, these are things you're going to run into, but the real learning, because it's like a 2-step process. You learn an idea and then you apply it. The application is what really reinforces the behavior. So that, I went to MI and I have a bachelor's degree in music and stuff, and their education program's great. But there's a lot of stuff in there where it may not be applicable to everybody. They just give you everything. They go, here's like everything. They smash it all together, and then they go, okay, now it's your job to figure out what's going to work for you. Because I have classmates that work in the arranging like sphere. They arrange music for like TV shows and all that. So all the music theory, all the classical stuff, arranging classes, they ate that stuff for breakfast, and that's what they do. I haven't had to really do much of that. Most of my classical training and the classical music theory has kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit because I haven't needed to apply it because I've been playing live. And it's the same thing. It's like, oh, cool, we can learn all the modes of the harmonic minor scale. And then I got out and tried to do sessions, and I was like trying to play like Alan Holdsworth licks or something over like a session.
Dominant just for the hell of it.
Yeah. I was like, what if I took this like outside? It would be kind of crazy. And then the producer would be like, you hear over the talkback like, yeah, that was cool. I hear what you're trying to do, but let's not do that. And I go, okay, cool. And then I'm, we joke. It's like, come on, bro, whose record is this anyway? But you're playing for other people, so you got to give them what they want. Right. And so you find you end up like having almost like a checklist. Like, okay, these things that I learned, super useful. These other things that I learned, they don't apply to me, so I'm gonna like let them kind of fall by the wayside. All those like modes of melodic minor I spent hours shedding, I haven't really needed to use them. But for example, playing to a click, playing with good time, just the musical part alone. I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole of also like who you have to be as a person, but like just the musical aspect of alone has been really useful. Like I've done some film scores, so reading has been super useful. I wouldn't have gotten called for those gigs if I couldn't read well. And understanding what a cue is. So you're looking at the cue thing, and I was like, what's that number mean? And the guy's next to me, he's like, that's what page you turn to, bro. Like I was like, oh, okay, cool. And understanding those kinds of things, like those have been really useful skill sets for me. And the same person that I would go to school with like has a completely different skill set because their application process in their career has been totally different. One guy that that I went to school with, his name's Nick Perez. He's an amazing guy. And shout out to Nick. Hey, Nick. He just played on the Grammys, whatever it was, like 2 weeks ago. And so his skill set is like about executing live every single time perfectly, like an perfect execution. It's got to sound flawless, right? So he really works hard on like, I'm going to play this song like 10 zillion times. And it's like on TV, making a good performance, making sure that this is executed flawlessly every single night of the tour. That's a different skill set than, let's say, a session musician who has to be like creative in the studio, or like if you're doing a film score where you have to like read the page and just like nail it in as few takes as possible. All different skill sets, all different classmates that I've had that I've all done different things. Or like a classmate of mine was Anderson Paak, right? And his skill set is all about artistry. Like, I'm going to create the most amazing music ever. And he doesn't have to worry about reading. He doesn't have to worry about, like executing this or that for an artist, because he is the artist. So he's all about making something and creating something that's great.
You know what I wanted to ask you before we run out? Cause I could talk. I'm going to grab your number at the end. We're going to text back and forth because I love the way your brain works with this stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is incredible. So for those watching, on top of all this incredible knowledge, you've also gotten to program the, you work with Fractal, and you've gotten to program the rigs for Steve Vai and Def Leppard and a plethora of other artists. How do you get your name thrown into that hat? Because that's a cool gig.
Yeah. Okay. So there's this concept, and, I'm trying to give everybody who's listening like actionable advice, right? Because sometimes I find that interviews, sometimes they go, oh, you just got to like get out there.
Yeah.
And I was like, how? Okay. So there's a concept, and I'll give the cliff notes. It's called permissionless apprenticeship. Okay. You can be anybody's intern now. Anybody in the world. You can be their intern. You don't need to even apply. Just do stuff for them. So meaning that, like, if you idolize this musician or whatever, you can start just creating stuff for them. So like, let's say you were like a super famous artist or whatever, somebody who's interested in video editing could, put a bunch of footage and videos together of your performances and go, hey, I did this, and uploaded it for you, right? They don't need your permission to do that. They can just put on YouTube, hey, I compilated all your music together in a playlist on Spotify. I compilated all these sessions that you've been on Spotify or Apple Music. So there's this concept that I use for Fractal. Basically, I'm friends with Justin Tchaikovsky, who's the guitar player for Seos, and he hooked me up with my first Fractal unit, which was an Axfex Ultra. And I was like, this piece of gear is amazing. Everybody was transitioning to in-ears, at that time, maybe about 10 or so years ago, for touring. And so what I did was, I was like, this piece of gear is amazing. Oh my God, I can just bring like a 2-space rack and like a pedal board, and that's it, and just run on in-ears for tours and gigs and sessions and everything else. And so I just started posting content about it. I just said, doing another session, love this piece of Fractal gear, hashtag Fractal Audio, put it on Instagram, put it on Facebook, just started spreading the word, because again, I was so excited about it. I didn't have like some tactical way. I was just like, this is really exciting. And at that time, everybody was still using tube amps. So after a while, we're talking like a couple years of this, just like people were like, hey, that thing that you keep using? Like, I'm curious about it. I was like, oh yeah, this thing's amazing. Check it out. It's the Axfex Ultra. It later became the Axfex 2. And so what happened was, in town in LA, some people were starting to transition to these kind of modeler units for tours, because it was for cartage, for travel. People were using Kempers, people were using Helixes and all this, or maybe whatever preceded the Helix. And so my name started getting out there of like, oh, this guy Rosh, he knows this unit inside and out. You should start talking to him, because he can go into any studio, any production rehearsal room, and just program the thing for you and get it working, sync it up with Pro Tools or Ableton or whatever. And because I had like, a technical background, I could kind of like do, basically be like a tech, And so I was hearing like one of the Percar brothers would do this with keyboards, like back in the 80s, he would program keyboards. So I started just, again, posting more content online, posting tutorial videos on YouTube, like, here's how to program this. And so what happened was, I was like doing really, small bands that were maybe like, the the opening slot at Coachella or something, or, doing some smaller tour. And eventually, the first big call that I got was Def Leppard. So the tech called me and he said, "Hey, we're transitioning everything over to Fractal units. And we hear you're the guy. We checked out your socials and everything, and it seems like you know this unit really well." So that was, X amount of years of content that I just put up just because I was so excited about this unit. Then I just wanted to help people. That they called me in, and they were like the first, I guess, major artist, like, household name, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm working for this band. And then, they're like the little fine print in Coachella, like or some festival date, here's the South by Southwest festival show. And I was like, yeah, I'm building guitar rigs for these bands, And so that was the first big one. And that kind of opened the floodgates, because once you get vetted, or once you, let's say, have somebody who vouches for you, that becomes an exponential thing. So you kind of always just need like that first thing to believe in you, or first person to just kind of give you a shot. And then the people in Def Leppard's camp just started just throwing my name out there. So my phone started ringing off the hook every touring season. It was just like, hey, we got your name from so-and-so. We hear you're the guy to come in and do this. And it branched out from not only Fractal stuff, but like I was doing stuff for RJM. I was doing stuff for Eventide. And it was like an interesting, like, skill, like intersection of skills, where it's like, okay, I'm a guitar player, so I understand guitar tone. But then it was like the technical minded, like, how do we get all these devices talking to each other via MIDI, making sure it's synced up with Pro Tools, all those kinds of things. And again, it was something I was super excited about, because I had like, an 80s cover band where we were playing the backing tracks, and I was having it like program and control my Fractal and do all the switching for that. And we were on in-ears and all this. So I understood that, how to do those things. And it was one of those things that we talked about, where things that you take for granted, other people may need help on. Right. And I was going into these big productions where like the tech was like, I have no idea how to do this. And I was like, are you your band plays arenas, like your band, like I had your band's poster on my wall, and then you just kind of like start getting calls and being in this camp. There's like in LA there's the Zappa alumni mafia or camp or whatever. It's like everybody who's played with Frank Zappa, they all know each other. And so they recommended me. I got the call for Dweezil Zappa. And then, Steve Vai played for Frank Zappa. And so that whole like little ecosystem, my name just kept getting thrown around in there, where they're like, oh, bring Rosh in. He's the guy who knows how to build all this stuff, program it, get it working, and do it fast and do it really efficient. And so, a lot of the things that I was doing early on in, like, let's say the Fractal space caught the attention of all the people at Fractal. And so they said, hey, your name keeps coming up. You seem to be staying busy in LA, if we could, can we call you at some point and then maybe work with some of our artists, who may need help? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's something I'm super excited about. So, a lot of companies that I'm involved with, it's just been this organic relationship. You kind of like just get excited about a product and you start making content. So this is like the permissionless apprenticeship. Just like if you're excited about something, share it with the world. Everybody feeds off of, energy, feeds off of like enthusiasm. So I was just always enthusiastic. You're a guitar player, so you understand this. It's like, oh my God, check out this pedal. It's amazing. This like, oh my, I was that guy. I was like, hey, check out this thing check out what I'm doing with this sound on Instagram, and then it just plants a little seed in somebody else. Like they may see that month down the road, they're at some session and they go, and maybe somebody hits like a wall or something and they go, hey, we can't figure out this piece of gear. And it goes, oh, I got a guy. Right. This guy did a wedding gig with like 3 years ago. He's the guy who knows this stuff inside and out. Let me give you his number. And then again, I get the phone call. I was like, hey, we got your number from Josh. And I was like, Josh. Oh, the drummer on that wedding gig like 2 years ago. Yeah. Hey, what's up? And he's like, yeah, he says you're the guy to come in and do this. And then it's been, again, a really interesting, great, lucrative, creative part of, my career, where I've gotten to work with like a ton of my heroes, where these are musicians that I idolize, even to this day, where I like go in and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. Like working with Steve Vai's been amazing. And he's like one of my absolute all-time favorites. And I was like, I remember walking in Harmony Hut the first time and just like looking, seeing his Grammys, seeing like everything, and just going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. I'm like, and he's so amazing. He's the nicest guy. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, that's Flo, like his number one gem, right? He's like, yeah, I'm, he's like, we're going to be doing this tour, blah, 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 and he's kind of showing me around the studio and, and I'm like, I can't believe I'm here, and it's the same thing, like, working with Def Leppard for the first time, like Def Leppard, they are right next door to Rush. So it's like in their big, huge, like rehearsal warehouse studio, like their rehearsal was right next door to Rush. So I got to listen to Rush I mean, all the things I've gotten to experience through just, doing a bunch of different things in LA has been so amazing for me that I sometimes like I pinch myself and go like, I can't believe I got to do that. That's, totally incredible. So, if there's one lasting thing that I can like leave with all your listeners, it's like, if you're enthusiastic, if you're excited about it, if you're stoked about it, just go do it, share it with the world, because somebody out there wants to learn what you do, how you do it, and they want you to be a part of it. And I think that if you're genuinely enthusiastic and happy about these things, these are the things that, are going to like return to you, tenfold, 100-fold, because the world needs more enthusiasm and excitement, because it's been a dark year for a lot of people. And I think like, you had Rod Castro on, and I mean, Rod is one of the most amazing humans that he exudes that energy of just like, hey, come here, let's just be a part of something amazing together, and I think that if you come from a genuine place, because if you're enthusiastic and excited about something that's genuine, that's why I like talk really fast. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited about this.
Dude, I do it too. I get like a 10,000 words in like a 60-second space, because I'm the same way. Like I feed off of it, man.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like those are the things that, the world needs more of. So whether it's music, whether it's technology, anything, like just share it with the world. People will come to you and see you and have you be a part of their thing and be a part of your thing. If you're, if you have a real genuine love for it.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for all of this insight and just the stories and just, it's inspiring in all the right ways. I tell you super quick, I'm a tube amp guy.
Yeah.
I was so anti all modeling. I bought and sold various versions of the Helix, no exaggeration, 7 times. And then finally, Jake Bowen from Periphery, he's like, dude, you got to get, because I went to high school with Jake. He's like,
okay,
Max FX 3. And I finally got one, and it changed my life. And
that's awesome.
I hire you to program it, so it's going to get even cooler.
Awesome. Dude, Rob, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And for everyone watching this in the future, all of Rosh's links will be below. So be sure to like and follow and subscribe. And we'll see you in the clubhouse.
All right. Bye.
All right, brother. See you.